Sergeant, and I am here just to demand that you tell me right off the bat what you are having for dessert tonight. Altmans, I see that you are enjoying some kind of little sweet, so please tell us what you're eating there.
Yeah.
We're doing a dulce de leche lava cake with caramel, whipped cream, and candied almonds.
Of course you are.
Just make us feel bad.
That sounds delicious. Anybody else have a dessert that they're enjoying, or do you just not want to follow the? Oh, okay,
Georgia.
Let's unmute Georgia. Hold on.
Yeah, I asked. I think she has to unmute herself. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Ghirardelli makes some hearts for Valentine's. See these?
Oh,
Nice.
So you have to hurry because Valentine's not too far away, but if you want to get something special, they're caramel filled like the regular Ghirardelli, but they're shaped like hearts.
Yes, and
Sounds pretty good.
Are they dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Dark.
Well,
Dark.
either one.
I think
Excellent.
you can do both,
You can
but
get milk
these are
chocolate.
dark chocolate. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I just want to remind if there are any grandparents in the audience, Valentine's is on a Sunday, which I just realized today, and I had to hustle to get my stuff in the mail out to dinner. So just note to self. Okay, anybody else that has a dessert?
I'm drinking hot cocoa.
Oh, wait. Hot cocoa is good. Corolla needs to be unmuted. Hold on. Corolla's holding up something.
Homemade cookies.
Homemade cookies?
Yep, Valentine's.
Yeah, Corolla always makes desserts appropriate for the movie.
What kind of cookies this time?
Just Valentine's cookies, so I don't know if they're appropriate.
Oh, sure. Oh, well, maybe not to the movie, but yeah,
But they are for the season.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can get some recipes to share, send out as a little follow-up eventually to you. And anybody else have anything? Okay, so on with the movie bit. I am thrilled to we actually have two guests tonight. Our first, of course, is Dr. Stephen Case, who is here. Well, he's in my upper, you can't see him, I guess, because we're in speaker view, but Steve's an award-winning educator with decades of experience in science curriculum development. He was a research assistant professor and assistant director of the Center for Science Education at KU, starting in the year 2000, and became its director in 2009. He's currently retired from KU and lives in Kansas City, but still teaches a class at the University of Texas in Austin, which he was talking about when we all came in, where he does use flock of dodos as a case study on the nature and process of science in one of his classes. Steve is also a friend of the Dodos filmmaker Randy Olson. And as he mentioned, he did accompany him to the opening of the film in New York City. We also have, for a little local historical flavor, Scott Morgan here tonight in an official capacity. Scott is the husband of our illustrious leader, Kathleen. And among many, many other accomplishments, he did serve on the USD 497 school board from, Scott, check these dates, I'm not sure, 1999 to 2003, and again from 2007 to 2011.
Right.
So,
the community decided to give me a slight break there, one election.
Yeah. Well, some might say that's a glutton for punishment, but I contend that Scott is a dedicated public servant and leader, and we're thrilled to have him tonight because he'll provide a little, maybe behind the scenes local perspective on a pretty controversial time, maybe not so much here in Lawrence, but certainly in the state and on the national level. So with no further ado, I want to start with you, Steve. Oh, and I forgot to mention the tie. Steve has a direct tie to the Billy Spears Band, right,
Yeah.
Steve? You have a lot of Lawrence, you lived here in Lawrence for many years. And for those who have been around like me, tell us about your connection to the Billy Spears Band.
My older brother, Bob, is the steel pedal guitar player for the original Billy Spears Band. He came to Lawrence in about 1970 and met Billy and was a part of the original band.
That's fine.
And Steve, as you recall, in the film was one of the guys, and I laughed at this, interviewed at the wheel of all places, because Randy apparently spent many a night there and decided just to take those interviews back to the wheel. How did you get involved with the film? How did you meet Randy? How did he find you? Just how did that happen?
First, I have to acknowledge the Beringers there. My friend in physics who has a flock of dodo behind him, you might notice.
Oh, wow. I didn't notice that. No, the Beringers
Yeah,
are
Phil was
actually-
very involved in all of these days as well. But the story of the film, Randy grew up here in Kansas City, went to Shawnee Mission Northwest. I went to Shawnee Mission South. I'm a year older than Randy, and we did not know each other. But during these days, you know, the original evolution issue started in about 1998, and then through 2000, and then the flock of dodos is about the second round of evolution debates, which was 2005 to 2007. So we attracted a lot of attention here in Kansas, and I was getting a lot of phone calls from media people of all flavors and several film crews. And for the most part, I was trying to avoid doing a lot of talking because we were actually trying to produce some curriculum science standards. One day, a friend called, biologist at KU, Daphne Fountain, and said, I've got this friend. He's a professor of biology who had a midlife crisis and dropped out of a tenured position and went to film school. He'd like to talk to you. So in the movie, you see the scene where I actually met Randy on the steps of the Natural History Museum, and Daphne is there as well. And so Randy came up, and we figured out that we had just 1 degree of separation for most of our lives. His cameraman that day was someone that I actually went to high school with, who runs Wide Awake Studios in Kansas City. So it's one of those very small world things. So Randy was able to fly a lot of information out of me, and most of it ended up on the cutting room floor. But since that time, a part of what came out of all of this and in the filmmaking was some work on the communication of science in general. And in that communication of science, we've gone to storytelling. Randy is now doing what's called story circles, teaching people narrative structure and how to tell stories. It's based on both his science background, but his storytelling background as well. So we actually do workshops and run story circles for scientists in particular now, several governmental agencies to help them communicate better.
You know, I wasn't going to bring this up until much longer in the program, but that
Sorry.
scene, no, it's good. That scene towards the very end of the film, where the guy with the boom mic was kind of, you know, walking around the group of those all male poker players, and I won't, you know, and basically
My evolution buddies, yes.
all male evolution buddies, and basically saying, why can't you guys tell your story better? I mean, it's this, why are you guys so bad at PR? And that was a point made really at the end of the film. Was that kind of a result with the storytelling and the story circles? Was that kind of a result of that criticism in that process? And
It is, because we did a lot of work on that understanding of science. And I actually use that wine-infused poker game as a case study for what scientists say. And if you follow them around the table, you know, one will say, we should teach evolution as a fact. Well, fact is one of those words in science that means something different than it does to general society and we use it differently. And another will say, well, the problem is that people are out of touch with the natural world. And, and it's always blaming people outside of science, or blaming the victims in this case, for their lack of understanding, when in fact we needed to look inside and figure out how and what we were communicating and figure out how to do that better. Because the basic understanding of science and what we do in science is what was lacking. And since we're the people responsible for helping society understand the natural world through science, we should be looking inside, not blaming them for not getting it.
Yeah, because the question was academics and PR firms, who will do the teaching? I think that was like,
Yeah, I'm a little afraid of PR firms doing the education.
Right. Yeah, but there's got to be a happy medium, I suppose. Okay. I wanted to say to everybody, if you have a question that comes up during the discussion, go ahead. I can see you all, so go ahead and raise your hand. I want to try to get a discussion going, not so much in the chat where you have to type it in, but if you have something to say about whatever we're talking about, I can see you, so go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll certainly call on you and get you into the discussion. And Margie is already, Margie, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I'm curious how you use fact differently than we, the general public, do.
In the science community, a fact is kind of a weak intellectual construct. It's an observation, and a fact can be overturned by a contradicting observation. For us, it's kind of a fact in the science community. A fact is that observation in a weak construct. If you have repeated observations, eventually you'll develop a pattern, and that pattern may become a law. Or if you advance your observations enough across enough different areas, eventually it becomes a theory. A theory is an explanation with predictive power. A fact is just a simple observation. So the word theory, which society kind of thinks is a guess about what's going to happen, is actually our most explanatory, powerful construct. And a fact is just kind of well, I saw this, it's real, but it's a weaker construct in our understanding of the natural world.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Oh, here's Jack.
Okay, Jack.
Sorry, I accidentally muted you. Hit unmute. Sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, as long as you're talking about that, what if you've had any relationship with what you think of Alan Alda's effort to try to get plain speak to science that he's doing on a more national basis?
We have. It's delicate political ground because we have Randy Olson, who's in Hollywood and doing storytelling, and Alan Alda, who's obviously a major star, supporting Stony Brook on, doing storytelling. But basically, they're both doing the same kind of things around the communication of science and more effective communication of science.
Right.
They're taking somewhat different approaches, and so of course they argue with one another about the best approach. But very similar work. And a lot of the professional organizations have also taken on toolkits for communication of science and more effective communication for science. Because we determined we were doing a really horrible job before and kind of creating our own problems.
Well, I guess I'd pop in and just say, one thing I was really impressed with was Randy's people skills, which I think he probably got from his mother, because parents were fantastic. But I don't know. I love the fact that, he could disagree with somebody, but still have a conversation and, I don't extract ideas. And at least he didn't, I don't know, he didn't put people down, which I really appreciated, because people, have different belief systems and agree or disagree, that you got to kind of talk to each other. And I thought he did a really fantastic job of that.
The film starts with a Latin phrase that means a thing speaks for itself. And it was part of his philosophy in making the film to allow people to speak for themselves. Even in the editing process, he wanted to make sure that people were able to explain their point of view without judgment or anything else, as opposed to some of the other folks who like to go out and be confrontational. And the debates were interesting, but that was important to Randy. If you get the film from the library, there's a section at the end called Pulled Punches. It's worth watching some of those because the man's name is escaping me. The guy who was interviewed in The Wheel, not John Calvert.
Jack Caswell, Caskell.
Yes, Jack says after the film, his first viewing, that he also appreciated that he was allowed to give voice to his opinions without judgment. He later regretted saying that after the film, and that's why it's in Pulled Punches, because he was accusing Randy of taking an evolutionary stance against Jack's point of view. But there's also a scene in there where Behe is talking about intelligent design, and the interview is kind of over, but the camera is still running, and he talks about, well, what do I care what they teach in public school? My kids go to private school. And Randy made a choice not to put that in the film, because although he was speaking for himself, it took away from his explanation of intelligent design. And Randy made very deliberate choices in making the film to allow people to speak for themselves.
I want to go back and establish a little history here, and to clarify, if just for me, because this is where I felt a little bit out of my element with just my memory of the history. The Kansas Board of Education referred to sort of two periods of time. It was EW1 and EW2, right?
Yeah, Randy made those terms up.
Oh, he did?
Nobody says that except Randy Olson.
Oh, I thought that came from the mouth of a Board of Education member.
Well, Randy told him to say it.
Oh.
Probably Stu Gamble, but there were two periods of time, which is the important thing that you're asking about.
Right. And so would you define and clarify just briefly those two periods of time? Because one, and then I want to bring Scott into sort of the local school board's take on each of those. EW1 was really more about evolution, right?
It was all about evolution, but and this will be a nice transition to Scott, because what we were doing is writing the curriculum standards for science curriculum in the K-12 schools. The curriculum standards get reviewed every years. So the original standards came out in about 1995. So in 1998, we were revising them because national standards had come out. So 98 to 2000, there was a writing committee. In that committee, the debate on evolution was with young Earth creationists. Young Earth creationists are folks who believe that the age of the Earth is about 6,000 years old. The genealogy in the Bible is the genealogy of humanity, starting with Adam and Eve. So that debate occurred 98 to 2000. 2005, we were going on the next revision of the standards, and that revision, the debate was on evolution, was with the intelligent design movement. And that's a different frame of reference. So intelligent designers are, I want to say, pseudoscientists. They have, they try to appear to be scientific, but they reach a point where they argue irreducible complexity that Behe talks about in the film. Irreducible complexity is completely non-scientific, but they try to make it appear to be scientific. One of the chief intelligent designers, John Calvert, is a lawyer. You know, in the law, the absence of evidence can be evidence for something in a trial or in that thing. In science, the absence of evidence is the absence of evidence. You don't know, and we say we don't know, and we mean we don't know. But for Calvert, coming from a legal perspective, not knowing means then, oh, this irreducible complexity then is possible. And if it's possible, then it can be real and it's a valid theory. So we were weaving all of these understandings of science and particularly of biologic evolution into curriculum standards so that school boards would have guidance on what we thought it meant for students to know, understand, and be able to do in science at various grade levels.
Right, and I remember that line. That's when we're setting kids up to either be anti-intellectual or have a crisis of faith. That sort of either or.
Yeah.
I thought was
yeah. I have a history too of not only teaching science, but teaching religion in a Catholic school. And the God of the Gaps theology kind of came from that combined background of setting children up in that paradox that, you know, is not going to resolve well for them.
no. So Scott Morgan, let's see, you got on the board in 8 did I say?
99, I think.
99, yeah. When did this hit your radar?
Oh, sometime shortly. I mean, it hit during the campaign. I remember that was when I ran 3 times, and it was always a question in Lawrence about what's your belief of evolution being taught in the classroom. So you always had to come up with something. But it came before the way it came before the Lawrence School Board was because, I don't know if some of you will remember, Jack Davidson is a retired physics professor when he was on the board. And he brought forward a resolution saying that the Lawrence, no matter what the state did, the Lawrence School District would always teach evolution. And in Lawrence, that was fairly non-complicated or not controversial. I mean, there were people that were concerned about it. I do remember at that time, and I saw some of them, not really, but people like them in that movie, of scientists that I just wish they'd shut up, because they had no touch at all with people, and I agreed with them in terms of what they were trying to say, but they really were dismissive of people and belittling them, often belittling their faith. And it was just unnecessary for what needed to be done. And I don't, if he's a friend of yours, I apologize, but the guy in the circle of poker, the poker circle, who Randy allowed to talk a lot, so I'm assuming that was with malice aforethought, reminded me of some people that I had to deal with who very much had opinions and were willing to share them, but were not very big on the listening. But so we voted 7-0 in support of that. And I mean, the thing from a local school board, which is always gets a little lost in this, and the real world side of this, states, you know, the feds will occasionally do some things, and they try more and more to do curriculum wise, but it's really a state based. In Kansas, you have the state curriculum. They set the broad curriculum as to what should be taught. And then it goes to the local school boards on how to implement those curriculum. Now, whether or not that's the way it's intended, that's the way the school boards view it. And then the real world is also teachers will take that and they have their own version of how that should be taught and brought forward. And there was no science teacher in Lawrence that was going to teach anything but evolution, no matter what we said, no matter what the state said. You know, at some point on some issues, you really push and you cannot teach certain things, especially when it got like you couldn't teach creationism. And that would be policed by other science teachers, by the principal. But it's a real diminished, or not diminished, but diluted authority that you have from any of these things. So we had it in Lawrence. It was part of campaigns. I have vague recollections of some candidates that didn't get very far that were for creationism. The intelligent design, when that was before the state school board, was during my hiatus, but it was still part of it because I got back on in 2007. And so we were making sure that we were implementing the continued teaching of evolution. But it was just, you know, your little small world. You'd have people come up and complain about things at a meeting or once email started, by email. But mostly it was in Lawrence, not controversial.
Okay.
You know, what Scott was saying about university professors, that really happened quite a bit in the first go around, 98 to 2000. And I remember sitting in some state board of education meetings, listening to some of my colleagues lecture the board on how ignorant they were being.
Yeah.
And we learned our lesson in that round. And that's part of why the communication skills evolved, because, you know, beating people up and humiliating them doesn't work. And Phil Behringer was a part of the second round with Kansas Citizens for Science forming, and really working on how we communicate came from those they were horrible. It was terrible to sit there in the room during those. Local school boards and the public hearings were a disaster in that first go around for the state.
There were times when I was actually, because you learn to think about a lot of things when you're on a school board, because you're getting yelled at a lot, and you just sit up there. And when these people would come, I'd think, I'm trying to discern the difference here between a priesthood and a religion. That science, almost some of these people treated science as a religion, and they were the priest and were not to be questioned. And it was their job to provide the common people with the truth, but not necessarily explain how that was arrived at or to break it down. So I kind of amused myself thinking of as Father so-and-so up there, you know, blessing me with his wisdom and insight into the true faith.
Phil, I think I'm feeling like we need to get you in on this. If only so we could see that flag behind you on full screen, but go ahead with whatever you want to. Oh, you'll have to unmute.
So this is a souvenir from the Topeka Intelligent Design hearings. This is not an example of diplomatic communication. I don't know if
but it's funny.
But it's funny. So Harry McDonald, a biology teacher, was president of Kansas Citizens for Science for, I don't know, about a decade, I think. And he moved to Seattle a few years ago, and this was in his basement. So I inherited some of the souvenirs of these culture wars from Harry's basement. So one of the things Kansas Citizens for Science tried to do was be respectful of religion. In fact, in the early days, we met in a Presbyterian church. The minister of that church was one of the leading rabble-rousers in our group. And I think that's so important to offer the message that, you know, for the majority of people, religion and science are not incompatible. And if you try to make people choose between religion and science, that's a tough way to go about your argument. So as Steve said, hopefully we learned something from from the initial young Earth creationist issue, and we're able to be a little more effective in our communication when intelligent design came along.
So for you or Steve or anybody really, how do you look back now at those days with the perspective, I mean, that time gives you, if nothing else, and then think about where we are now, particularly not necessarily with this discussion, but say with like climate change or, you know, I mean, have we made any progress at all in the way we, or the two sides involved, discuss, communicate, story tell, or are we more polarized than ever on that score?
I'll offer something quick and then I'll mute myself and let your guests speak. I think the speed at which misinformation travels has gotten worse. And it had been about a decade since I'd watched this movie, and I was thinking about that while rewatching Flock of Dodos, and it's a challenge to combat misinformation.
Yeah, point taken. Steve?
I think Phil is absolutely right. We've made a lot of progress, but climate change, the anti-vaccine movement, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about the nature of science and how and what we do and what we understand and how we understand the natural world, and why we can say certain things. The speed with the misinformation can be spread, the denial of evidence now is staggering. And it emphasizes in education, we need critical thinkers, people who can look at information and think for themselves rather than just being a consumer of that information, but actually process it and think about it. And I think we've made some progress on that. And I think as we see the vaccine rollout now, we can see that. But there's still a hardcore, maybe 20% of society that just will not accept knowledge that is in opposition with their worldview. And so it's really hard. We understand a lot more. People are lining up to take a really radically new process of creating vaccines right now, which to me is really exciting. I worked in biotechnology, and that's the kind of work we were doing. That's the kind of understanding that the science community, public or private, can generate these new cures for disease. But there's still resistance to that, even though we're curing disease. You know, it's that absolute knowledge versus understanding knowledge is still a problem.
Yeah. And yet you're right, the speed in which information travels back and forth, and just the fact that so many people have a platform now and a very loud voice in some cases, people who would not have had a platform back when this was going on in the early aughts. So
Kathy, Kay has a comment.
Oh, yes, Kay, please.
I think it was interesting to me in the movie how he would periodically stop and give a definition of a word. And I think what that emphasized to me was how a lot of this is about semantics. And sometimes people then, will create a phrase that actually is capturing the same idea that they had before, but it sounds different. For example, like, intelligent design is really sort of another expression of a type of creationism. But I thought that was really a strength of that movie, showing the definitions. And that's in a sense how he came to the end, to show that because of the words that were used, we really need to keep teaching evolution. Teaching evolution is scientifically sound, but I think a lot of it is semantics, and we get involved in semantics, we get protective of semantics, and forget to listen, to what the other person is saying.
I think that's an excellent point. Language is so critically important, and it's easy to get involved in your professional life and use the language of your profession that may not have meaning to the audience that you're speaking to unless you're giving a professional presentation. Words matter, and I think that you saw that Randy is aware of that as well in those definitions. I'll make sure to give him that feedback on that. We still talk about flock of dodos to this very day.
Jack, did you have something to say?
Yeah, when I was watching this, I was thinking back to when I saw the movie Whatever Happened to Kansas, not the book, the movie. And in the movie,
What's the matter with?
Oh, What's the Matter with Kansas? I'm sorry. And in the movie, they talked to the guy who at that time, I don't know if he's still there, was the head of the Creationism Museum when it first opened. And he was a fairly young guy. He was a doctorate. He had his doctorate from Harvard, which of course lent a lot of credence to his feeling. But I got the feeling in that movie, and I thought about it during this one, scientists are trying to convince everyone, but creationists or other non-scientific people, whatever their theory is, are just trying to convince anyone. And that seems to be a tremendous problem and a tremendous advantage, because especially in social media, when you see things all over Facebook or something, you don't know if that represents 20%, as you said, or does it represent 34%, or does it represent 70 million versus 77 million. We don't really know from hearing it. But all another person, a non-scientist, has to do is convince some people, whereas science's role is to explain it to everyone. And that seems like a huge difference and a huge problem.
I think it is, and particularly in the first round, and Kathy will have to cover her ears here because we complained about the media a lot because they would tell both sides of the story as if both sides were equivalent. And you see the same thing in the climate science thing now, where 99% of the science community has come to consensus about climate change and all of that. But you'll always hear from the climate deniers as well. So there's this balance, but it's not an equal balance. But both stories, our sense of fairness makes us tell both stories. Randy does have a movie on climate, by the way. It's called Sizzle.
Oh.
So I don't know if it's available through the library, but he kind of, these issues that carry out of evolution, and we kind of determined in evolution, he put into Sizzle. His mom, Muffy, has a starring role in Sizzle as well, because Muffy became quite the star over time. Muffy passed away a couple of years ago, but Muffy Olson was a really special person, and lived out at Lake Quivira for many years, and just really became kind of the communication focal point of the movie, kind of a turning point in the movie.
I was going to ask you, and by the way, I'm a retired reporter, and I never covered hard news, only features, which really explains
See,
why I
I
was.
knew I'd make you defensive.
No, I'm not. But I was really interested in Muffy. I will admit I was fascinated by her and by this moose thing. Did I miss the moose why would she Muffy Moose? And do you know how that?
I do. She just liked, she had those moose figures and paper towel dispensers all around the house and stuffed moose. And it just, because of her love of these knick-knack mooses, she became Muffy Moose.
Well, and he also,
When the kids were little, when Randy was young.
oh, okay. Because Randy also made a point to kind of work his family history in with his father and his grandfather. And I wonder just how much the family influenced him or inspired him to make the film in the first place. Was she really the spark and really sending him these newspaper clippings, or was that sort of a?
No, that's all true.
Uh-huh.
And John Calvert was Muffy's neighbor at Lake Quivira, literally across the inlet from one another. So they knew each other, and she was sending Randy those newspaper articles.
Yeah, she was a force of nature. Who
She
else has
truly
it?
was.
Who else? Scott, do you want to say something?
Well, yeah, just from a layperson, I guess, perspective of trying to be the go-between experts in one field or another. In my case, clearly, a lot of times it was education, and with the community members that you had to try to convince of something. What you always found, whatever the issue was, now if religion got into it, it made it even more complicated, but whatever the issue was, motives were always inferred on people, and both from the expert side and from the community side. And those motives are what people really got mad about, even if they weren't true. I mean, they knew what you were thinking, and they knew what you really meant and what you really were doing. And you see these in so many issues. And I think you see it in climate change, you see it in vaccinations, you see it in GMO, where there are a lot of facts, not to use the lay term, not the science term of it, but but there are also a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of things going on there. And everybody gets on one side or the other and stop listening, and they just get mad. And I would sit there at different things and going, we're just trying to solve problems here. We're not trying to win. And the winning here is figuring out what those problems are. It's not that I'm wonderful, but I could see where people were coming from on both sides. And it is amazing how quickly that wall closes, that door closes, where you actually communicate and you're not just yelling to the people on your side. And I don't know. And I think scientists are particularly, and I think what you're doing, Stephen, is really important, because I think they're particularly unschooled in how to have that kind of discussion, because they're used to debating within themselves about scientific facts, I guess, and about what their thoughts are. And, there's been a lot of big arguments within science. That's how it continues to grow. And that's where I get frustrated as a layperson. It's just when that door closes and we stop listening to one another, but we know what they think. And that's what really makes us mad. It's much more than what they're saying. It's what they think of us. And they're belittling us. They're making fun of us. They think we're stupid, or the scientists are frustrated because you're not recognizing what I'm saying. You're not realizing the truth here. So I just throw that out there. I don't have a solution. I just like to point out issues, but it was that door closing and we stop thinking, we stop listening happens really quick. And I guess with social media, it happens immediately.
I think that's an excellent point. And it kind of goes to what Kay was saying about linguistics too. The word evolution is one of those words. In the very first go around, we were writing standards and we wrote these great standards, and then we had to have public hearings. The very first testimony from the public was a fire and brimstone Pentecostal Black preacher who basically was reacting to us propagandizing kids with social Darwinism. And biologic evolution is not social Darwinism. And so we were completely caught off guard, but I've come to understand that in communities of color, particularly the Black community, evolution has this social Darwinistic piece that leads to genocides, leads to a lot of the horrific things that have happened in the past. So just using the word evolution with this preacher, the door was slammed and was not going to come open because of his understanding of that word. And I do have to point out here that, you know, we've all heard survival of the fittest associated with evolution. That's not a biologic concept. That was Herbert Spencer, who was an economist, who came up with that, and that is social Darwinism. And social Darwinism is really the ugly side of capitalism, but it has nothing to do with science and biologic evolution, but it's, again, language that gets really tricky.
Anyone else?
Is it survival of the lucky? Is that what the science side?
Frequently, yes, at least at the individual level.
So Steve, do you think this thing will come around again? I mean, is it, you know, over and resolved, or you know, it's taken a back seat to, like you say, vaccines, climate change? And is there a community or a force out there that just won't take no for an answer and is planning to bring this back to the forefront in the future?
I don't know. I'll say that right up front. I know John Calvert for a long time. The way my writing committee went, some of the state board members were appointed members to the committee who were creationists, intelligent designers. So there were a number of people on the committee of 27, 8 to be exact, who were there to kind of disrupt the process. Those 8, after all of this was done and after the movie, filed a lawsuit against the state of Kansas. Calvert formed a group called COPE, which was Citizens for Objective Presentation of Evidence or something like that. So they were willing to go to court to stop evolution from being taught in schools. And this was about 2 years, so 2009. And that was drug out for a while, but basically dismissed as being a frivolous lawsuit eventually. But yeah, I think that would indicate there are still people out there who are very upset by this issue and don't get it. And should the opportunity arise again, it could come up again. I think the fact that it does come up with climate change and it does come up with vaccines, there'll be other hot button issues that represent the misunderstanding of science.
Shelley has a comment. Oops.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would predict that it will come up again because while it wasn't mentioned in this movie at all, I well remember having grown up here in Lawrence that in the mid 70s, creationism, there was a debate around it then, and Professor Pat Bickford, a creationist from outside, came in and they had a debate in oh shoot, I am not forgetting the name of the building now. That it's the one that burned and then was rebuilt.
Hoke.
Yeah, thank you, Hoke Auditorium. They had a debate there where Pat Bickford, who was religious, he was a member of the Congregational Church and so forth, but he was a geology professor. And as far as I'm concerned, he wiped the floor with the guy. But you know, it just keeps coming around. I think every generation or so, it's going to arise again.
I don't know if you know, is it the Discovery Institute? Is that the cover?
Yep.
They are still very active. You go to their website, they are hosting conferences this month in Dallas. Behe, or however you say his name, came out with a new book, I think 2 years ago.
Yeah.
They are very much, it's a very slick operation, and they're still going quite guns. I did also, though, did see, I guess there's a National Center for Science Education, which, and they had an interesting number of a study done that shows that the percent of secondary teachers teaching evolution or creation as having a scientific basis had dropped from 32% to 18% between 2007 and 2018. Now, I still find 18% alarming, but that is at least a trend in the right direction. But that's how much it's still out there.
One thing that didn't make it into Randy's film, there is another film called Darwin versus Kansas, made by a filmmaker named Jeff Tamlin, that covered the scientific hearings on evolution that Steve Abrams ran in Topeka. Randy's film didn't really cover those scientific hearings, but the science community boycotted those hearings. And it turned out to be a successful boycott, but it's kind of funny how that evolved, because I was sitting in my office, which at the time was on the top floor of the School of Education. So I had my feet up on the desk, looking out the window, thinking deep thoughts like they paid me to do. And I was remembering a poster that was in my brother Bob's apartment in Lawrence in 1970, a little flower, and it said, "What if they gave a war and nobody came?" And I was thinking, well, what if they have these hearings and nobody goes? So I called my friend Jeannie Scott at the National Center for Science Education, and I said, "Jeannie, what do you think about this? What if we just don't go?" And we talked about it, and we talked about the consequences that might have, and we decided that we'd give it a go, and it became a national movement. And basically, the science community didn't participate. But that's when it was really important what Phil did with Kansas Citizens for Science to kind of fill in the gap there and correct the ridiculous testimony that was coming out every day, and those kinds of things. But I have one of my profile pictures of me is sitting at the confluence of the Red River and the Rio Grande River, and I'm holding up a rock, and it happened to be at 9 o'clock on the first day of the hearings that were going on in Topeka. That's where I was that particular day. But in that case, we decided that not participating in those was a better way to approach this, rather than getting into these debate structures where there's never a winner. You know, when Bill Nye and Ken Ham debated recently, we heard the same old again. The debate in the 70s, I also went to that. I was an undergraduate then. Michael Behe came once in Malat Hall and gave a talk, and nobody changes. Those don't progress knowledge. They don't speak to people. It creates bigger walls. And looking back now, I would say that strategy was really a solid one and really a good one for moving this on. Discovery Institute's going to keep going. They just have some true believers who feel this is their mission, and they are the ones that I think Randy talks about the wedge document in the film. It's a deliberate political strategy to drive people apart by applying a wedge. It originally came from Dwayne Gish, who was a young Earth creationist. He was a Berkeley law professor. And if you drive a wedge between people's beliefs and their scientific understandings, it's their thought that people will default to their religious beliefs. It's a false divide, and they exploit it for political reasons.
Okay. Is there anyone else here who would like to unmute yourself and make a comment, ask a question before we go? Or should we just unmute everybody at the same time? Let's do that.
Kathleen says Kansas versus Darwin's available on Canopy.
Oh yeah, so Sizzle is not. Okay, yeah, so I don't know if you all are seeing the chat. it is available on Canopy, which is the streaming service you watched this film on. So
Mhm.
check it out if you want to.
Yeah, I couldn't find Sizzle, even at the library, so I will work on that.
Okay, we'll let you
Randy
know.
will be thrilled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but I think I asked everybody to unmute, so I think we're good.
Okay. Well, so did you all think the film was worthwhile? Everybody, 4 stars, 3 stars?
Yes.
Yeah, that was really good.
Very
Out of
much.
5
Teresa?
stars. How many stars? 4 stars?
I gave it 4.
Okay, 4 stars.
2
Yeah.
opposable thumbs up.
Yeah. I thought it was very entertaining. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
it's for
was.
this really good balance of the way they he handled the material. And
I love the
Oh,
way
yeah.
he talked about who would you rather play poker with? And he had all of the creationist people and none of the evolution people. That was cute.
I have to agree. I have to agree. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, let's give a big hand to Steve and Scott
Yay,
for,
thank you.
joining us.
Really
We
great.
can't thank you enough. And thank you all for coming. Maybe there's time to watch the impeachment trial. I don't know. But thank you for coming here and not watching that. So we will see
Thank
you
you.
next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you
It was
all.
a great
Right,
discussion.
Thanks. Thank you.